Hello, everyone. I'm doing the Stump the Professor video, and I have been moving the last 2 weeks, and I'm finally set up in my new house. Yay! And I brought my bookshelves with me so I can keep on the same look here for you all. And I just love it. Makes me so happy to be feeling more settled. Anyway, thanks for your patience if I've missed anything. That's why I've been a little in the upside down with the move. So if there's something that wasn't connecting, please try and ask me or send me another message. I'd be happy. I'm back in the game. I'm back and ready to focus. So this Stump the Professor questions, there were some really interesting questions. Some of them are so good. Ooh, and I don't have the answers to all of them, but I'm going to give it a try, and I'll tell you from my communication perspective and my conflict management perspective how I can add to them, add to the thoughts that you all have been discussing in your meetings. And then this is just a moment in time. It's so funny, just like most of you, like you think of a good example, and then as soon as I stop recording, I'll be like, oh, but there is this point and I forgot to make it. Or a couple days later, like something will have been ruminating, just cooking away, and I'll be like, oh, I get it now. And that's one of the reasons why I like to do this, because it keeps me thinking and growing. And I'm always curious about what do you find interesting and what's important for you. I don't want to build this class in a vacuum. I want to build this class collaboratively. And when you ask these questions, whether I know the answers or not at this moment in time, it's really just a way for me to feel like I'm in a dialogue. And when I start building the class next time, I see where you put your emphasis of what you thought was important. All right, so we're going to start with the Clumsy Giraffe Pirates. Hello, Team Clumsy Giraffe Pirates. You had some really, oh gosh, I'm probably going to spend too much time on your questions. They're so important. First question. Number one, why do you think or not think? So why is mindset a privilege? Or I guess you're asking, do I think mindset is a privilege? And then the second part of the question, is it a combination of privilege, or is it something that is there for the taking kind of thing? Can you take privilege? Which is a very privileged question to ask, I think, to think that it can be taken, because often that doesn't always occur to everyone. So the first thing is, to start off with my response to this, is we always have to remember that difference matters. Difference is important. There's a very important book by Brenda J. Allen that's called Difference Matters. And I really like that book because she really discusses privilege in all these different aspects. There's, of course, the way we hear it most often in economic privilege, education privilege, power and privilege, race and privilege, heteronormative privilege or sexuality preference privilege, gender binary privilege. There's all these kind of or ability and privilege. And she kind of looks at each one individually, but she starts really expanding how we have to think about each of these elements when we are different. Being different is also a type of privilege. And the reason why is because it creates a different mindset. It keeps a different perception. And when we talked about in Cynefin theory, how we wanted to understand how to do true problem solving in group settings, which we're really talking about the complex area of really getting into a collaborative place, we need difference. We need difference in order to do true problem solving or to make a real difference in the areas that we're trying to change or do effectively or to be effective. So Privilege comes in all different shapes and sizes, and some of you in your meetings talked about that, which I was really appreciative when I heard people, including, I always say, even being right-handed is a privilege, and someone said that in the meeting. Thank you. That was great to hear someone bring that up, and that's actually one of the chapters in Brenda Allen's book, Dr. Brenda Allen, Difference Matters. It's a great book. It's a little bit of an academic read. It's not a casual reading, but it's definitely a book I would recommend to learn more about this topic. All right, the second question from our Clumsy Giraffe Pirates: in what ways are we able to self-monitor ourselves to become better leaders? And actually, I think this question, we don't even need the word leadership. We definitely need good leaders are good self-monitors, but the question is also for all of us, whether you don't want the role of leadership, that we should be in a place of having some self-monitoring, basically understanding other perspectives than ourselves. When we're good self-monitors, we're good listeners. We're good observers of others and the environment and the context and the relationship dimension. And we are willing to partake in perception checking, meaning we are considering other points of view other than our own. And even if we don't always agree with someone else's point of view, we are approaching a dialogue for a perception checking. And that dialogue is about curiosity. It's about acknowledging differences. It's about taking responsibility, setting up expectations. And as soon as we end up in a dialogue where we're really pulling ourselves into the listening role, then what we end up doing is we start to grow from a self-centered or egocentric perspective. And it's like we're expanding our solar system to understand that there is just more than just us, that we are actually in a rotation of perspectives. Now, as I say something about self-monitoring means perception checking, it means listening, it means getting feedback, understanding feedback loops. I just want to put a note about in organizations or workplaces, they have these kind of built in as either sometimes managers have to have like, I don't know, what they're called, like 360 reports, where a supervisor has to get evaluations from top peers, people they manage in subordinate levels, so that's what the 360 comes in. So a manager can get feedback or evaluation. And then, of course, most of us are in situations where we have to go in for a performance review or some type of evaluation. And unfortunately, this is not the kind of, it's important feedback, you want it, but often we are dealing with supervisors or organizational systems where these have been set up almost in a conflict avoidance way, or they're set up as a checks and balance just to make sure that you can keep your steady on your employment. And they're not really about you building yourself in the company in a career and getting the feedback you need to build your leadership skills. When we talk about getting feedback from others or doing perception checking, we really want to be in relationshiping with people who understand our vulnerabilities, appreciate our strengths, and want to see us succeed, that our success is something that they are also interested in. And that's why the Charles Feltman book, The Thin Book of Trust, because we need a foundation of trust to really be in a dialogue to get the feedback we need so that we can develop and be better people. When we're just attacked with criticism and criticism and criticism, and we're not in a dialogue with it, that can often be something where we build up armor and we start to move into a self-serving bias, just as a way to protect ourselves in an environment that we don't feel safe in. And that's very different than the type of feedback or self-monitoring that we need in order to grow to be better leaders. So I just wanted to mention that. I could talk more about how those performance evaluations are set up in really often dysfunctional ways. But I bet you could talk about them too. I bet y'all know about that. So something to think about. All right, third question from our Clumsy Giraffe Pirates. How do you work with someone you can never converse smoothly with? How do you work with someone who you can never converse smoothly with? How do you improve these conversations? Okay. Well, I have two responses I have a couple of like columns of response. First is when we're not conversing smoothly, one of the first things is you might be in an intercultural communication collision, and that an intercultural communication collision deals with high context versus low context, individualism versus collectivism, achievement cultures versus nurturing cultures, uncertainty avoidance cultures, masculine, feminine speech. Often we feel kind of disjointed when we're trying to communicate, and someone is in just a totally different cultural script, even if we have the same language, even if we're in the same organization. This becomes an issue. This is why not just what I teach in my class, because I try to get you some cultural communication elements, but you should be a lifetime learner of intercultural communication if you're going to be in a leadership role, and if you're in any type of supervisor or managerial role where you have to work with the public or other groups of people, or people are working on your team that come from all different walks of life, and you should be able to adapt. So a good leader is going to have an element of being able to listen, understand what they're listening to, and find ways to adapt to that. So, for example, I direct plays at the Majestic Theater, sometimes here in Corvallis, just a community theater director here. And one of the things I do before our first read through, which is a traditional first rehearsal, is I try to meet with each of my actors one-on-one. I just say, do you want to meet for coffee? Do you want to meet for tea? Do you want to jump on a Zoom? And I just talk to them about everyday things. And I try and get to know who they are and their experience in theater. What are they excited about the play and their new character, things like this. And I do this with my designers as well. I try and have a one-on-one, and what I'm really doing is I'm listening. It's not about, I'm the director and they're going to hear me talk plenty. But when I do the one-on-one, I want to hear how they talk. And very often I can start to identify if they're high context or low context. Are they more collective culture? And if they are, then when I'm in the bigger group and I have to talk in just one way for everybody, and my coaches out there, or anyone who supervises a team or is part of a team, you have to kind of create this meta way to talk to everyone. I can adapt I can try and adapt my message to each individual when I'm talking and giving notes and perception checking with them. And that's really important. So when you aren't conversing smoothly, first thing is, are you in an intercultural encounter where the salience is interrupting the flow of the dialogue? Second thing, is it a turn-taking problem? Here's something I haven't talked about in class. So turn-taking is, when do you know it's your turn to talk? And this is the pandemic and trying to do meetings on Zoom or on these virtual spaces has completely upended our kind of cultural scripts of turn taking. There's two main turn-taking signals cultures. One that is an overlap, that people talk over each other. It often feels like interrupting sometimes, but if everyone's part of that culture, it's a really dynamic conversation style, and it has a lot of energy, and I'll talk about that. The other one is a pause. It's my turn to talk. Your turn to talk. My turn to talk. Your turn to talk. And depending on the culture, the pause can be really tiny, barely noticeable, or it can be bigger or bigger and bigger. And this is one of the things with the flow of conversation in virtual meetings, which often has to be established in norms, is you get it. If there's an overlap person and they're getting excited, they get really frustrated with virtual meetings because they're like, I want to jump in because I agree with this. And if we met in a conference room like we used to, I used to be able to get my thought in and not, all the technical pieces of it wouldn't be interrupting my ability to speak up. And that's really frustrating for overlap people to try to adapt to virtual spaces. The pause people are doing great because they're used to pausing. They're waiting for to be called on. They're used to be waiting for being asked a question, things like that anyway, which you have to be much more explicit in a virtual space for turn taking. But in an interpersonal encounter where we're face to face, if we had two people that were overlap, what happens is volume becomes the indicator of whether you should jump in or not. So someone's talking and they start like kind of trailing off and and their volume starts going down. That almost becomes, it's an unconscious signal. But if you're part of the culture, you already know it without even having to think about it. Someone trails off, you jump in, but your volume is always a little higher. Now, let's say this person didn't get the signal right. This person was just trying to gather their thoughts, but they're not completely done with it. This person comes in at a volume here and they'll tap them out and they'll raise their volume, and then this person will trail out and then this person will come in. If you're not from this culture group and you're watching this conversation or listening to it, it gets louder and louder, and it almost sounds like people are having an argument. But the truth is the dynamics of the volume and the overlap is the dynamic way that you demonstrate your listening by coming in like, oh yeah, that reminds me of this, or oh yeah, da 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 da. And that is part of the belief structure of belief structure, that's the wrong word. That's part of the dynamics of the cultural norms of that. Where in pause cultures, there's usually much more hierarchies. The relationship dimension is really impacting the conversation. So the amount of pause will be as a way of showing respect if there's any hierarchies to the relationship or how we show respect. So that's the first part of this question. I have a second part. So the question again, how do you work with someone you can never get conversation flow with? And how do you improve these conversations? So the first two things I'm talking about, culture and turn-taking signals, are really to understand that we need to start tuning in to what's actually happening with the conversation. So then we can move into a meta communication, establish norms, or adapting ourselves so that can go smoother. The other part is, the other main part of my answer for this question is, depending on what's happening with the conversation, whether you are with a monologuer who isn't really interested in your point of view, and every time they overlap with you and interrupt or jump in, they never give the microphone back. The truth is you can't really force someone to listen to you. Even if you have all the power and you will sit here and you will listen to me, people have ways of zoning and shutting down and stonewalling as a self-defense mechanism to regulate emotions in forceful authoritarian situations. But if you're just with a coworker or someone where there's more peer or solidarity in the relationship, you cannot force someone to listen. The other thing is a way to improve is to start tracking to monitor yourself and the other and track what are the elements that are happening in the conversation and just start trying different things. And just like in complexity, such in the complex part of Cynefin, you're going to have sense and probe, and you're going to have trial and error and fail and try and try again, fail, error, and problem solve, and keep changing tactics. And if you ever hit a conversation where it went well, why? Can it be repeated, or was that a unique moment? When you get a good conversation with someone that you've struggled with, say it out loud. This conversation went well. I really appreciate this one. Thank you for, and then whatever it is, the behavior that made it go well. Oh, they had Clumsy Giraffe Pirates had a bonus fourth question, and that was, how do you talk to someone who avoids conflict? Okay, we covered this in my conflict management class, which some of you have taken and some of you are about ready to take. I think this kind of goes with the last question with, which is basically you can't force someone to listen to you. You can't force someone to take responsibility or acknowledge your piece in it. If they're conflict avoiders, as I say in my conflict management class, this is for many, many different reasons people avoid conflict. They could, it's usually coming from their past. There might be something going on with where they're very extra sensitive, or they have some pessimism. They shut down in conflict. They have trouble self-regulating their emotions and they don't want to blow up. I mean, and maybe they don't feel safe in the relationship, or they don't feel safe in the context of the situation. And that's why it's you have to be really careful to not force anyone into a conversation they don't want to be a part of. I think if there's a conflict situation, you can, this is complicated because obviously if someone's in human resources and they need to meet with someone because of some performance situation or something, a violation of the workplace, people will try to avoid those, sometimes that meeting, or I'm sick now, or, like there's that and that. And eventually for them, there will be a point where they can't avoid the topic anymore unless they want to just turn in their resignation and not have that job anymore. But this is something that's a totally different thing. I want to talk more about when we are actually in dialogue, in solidarity, with someone, and they're avoiding the conflict. I think it's give them some options. Like, hey, I have a difficult conversation, and when would be a good, and I want to acknowledge that it's difficult for me too. But we do need to talk about this. When is the best time to talk about this? What would be best for you? Where would you like to do the meeting? Like, give them some options. And that would be a way to help empower someone a little bit with something that might be really hard to do. Okay, number two, the next team. No, not the second week. I'm afraid to do certain gestures. I'm going to get an animation here from Zoom. The Birdie Brigade, Aaron and Dominic, thank you for your questions. They were a couple of them I already answered in your chat. They were just kind of silly little questions about the conversation itself, and they're kind of like little quiz questions. That was funny. And then your other question, what is an example of a way to let a batter know which pitch is coming? It's hilarious. What is an example? Well, the Houston Asteroids banged on a trash can. So there's your example of a way to let it know a pitch is coming. Okay. Thank you, Birdie Brigade. A little silliness there. Okay, I'm going to move on to Team Ross. Team Ross is got our Stump the Professor questions here. Again, I'm going to go into a little bit of some time to answer these. At what point, here's the first question. At what point do we need to give up on someone or cut ties, especially when you are in a position where you can't leave? Oh, well, I think it depends. It depends. Every question, it depends. These are so context driven, and each relationship is unique. Each conversation is unique. So it really depends. I think at what point do we give up on someone is basically, I'm going to interpret that question as when at work, do you stop trying to collaborate or problem solve with them, or they're not responding to feedback, or you're right, they have their own point of view and they're dug in on that point of view. And so you're at a certain point, it becomes exhausting to work with people who don't want to dialogue or consider other points of view other than their own, and aren't willing to take and become just defensive. I have things to say about that too. That brings up a thought. But the first thing is, what you're really talking about is a loss of trust. If someone isn't dialoguing, or when you try to bring something up that's really important to the flow of the workplace, or a process that's in place that's interrupting, maybe something they're working on isn't congealing right with your departments and what they're working on, and you're trying to coordinate things and they don't want to dialogue or problem solve, you can't really cut ties completely because you're all in the same organization and what they do, but that person's really just lost your trust, right? You can't really trust them. And that means you're going to have to fall into processes or bring in or really try and problem solve how to deal with things when they aren't connecting, like almost like a checklist process on your end to double check what they're delivering to you, if that's what it is, something like that. And that just means that if you are in a supervisory role where you can give a performance evaluation or feedback, you don't want to save that for the performance evaluation. You want to be crystal clear about that early on and explicit and say, I really need to review this with you. But if you're in the subordinate position and you have no power, I still think it's okay to bring something up, but you can't belabor the point, right? You should never belabor the point. You just be accountable for what's accountable, take responsibility for what you can. And then if the other person isn't doing that, you can see from our work with trust that they've lost a lot. I think what this brings up is that as much as we can, use communication tools to help us manage these workplace situations or these relationship situations. The truth is, communication does not solve all problems. In fact, communication sometimes makes problems worse. So stepping away, getting perspective, checking in with others can be a way to make sure that you're understanding what's going on. Now, just on another note, when you need to give up on someone, I don't like this. I'm not sure I would ever use that wording that way, but that's just the wording of the question. When it's time, I always think of when it's time to take a different path. So I'm like, you go on your way, I'll go my way, so long, it's been good to know you kind of stuff. I think it's when you've really been asked to sacrifice and give up and give up, and the other person is not really showing up and not acknowledging the work you've been doing, and you really stop losing track of who you are. Like you've given up so much of yourself, which we do have a little bit loss of self in our jobs or in relationships. But we are seen and we are acknowledged and we are appreciated for those sacrifices that we do. But if we aren't getting that and we're giving up to the point where we've lost who we are, that's when I would walk. And I have had to make those really tough choices. But sometimes you have to stay on a job where you can't leave. And that's true. And those are really hard things. I don't have the full answer to this one. This one was tough. Whew, this was a tough one. Second question, what tactics can we use to communicate with someone with values are different than our own? Okay, I would say almost everyone you're talking to has different type values than you. Everybody is different. Everyone's got a different point of view, and difference matters. Yeah, I'm gonna say it again, difference matters. So people might have different priorities and where they put the emphasis of a value. Now, if you're in a workplace situation, the company should have a set of values, a mission statement, goal statements that are guiding everyone. And often this is one of the things that comes up as a conflict in a workplace is a company might put this great mission statement up, but then what are the managers, supervisors, and workers and the nuance of the daily activities are not reflecting the values of the work that have been established by the company values. I think it's always good to establish communication norms, find common ground, look for any window you can agree with something, even if it's just the most minute thing that you can agree with, like we can agree that this is a problem. That's usually what happens when we're in places where we're really different. And we should stop trying to persuade each other so much and really live more in the realm of information and motivation and less persuasion. I think because so much of our daily life and our daily conversations all feel like they're about being persuasive, and we are being constantly persuaded to not just vote for me or buy this, but it's persuading about like all around us. So learning how to communicate in a way where you just have information and how people can value that I'm going to rewind. Just giving out information can make you more trustworthy. Being an informative person, not a persuasive person, builds trust, because what happens when you dialogue about information and then let people decide what they want to do with that information, over time, with reliability and consistency, you build trust. And that's really what you want to start moving towards. So then if you do have something really important that you need to persuade someone, because you haven't asked and asked and asked and asked and asked, I need this, you should, all of a sudden that one request becomes really unique and you haven't exhausted that person and they're more willing to show up because of your consistency and reliability. All right. Third question. Oh, this is about the Cynefin framework. Is there a best section to work from? And is there a healthy balance between those sections? So I would say, of course, the best section is the obvious section. Yay, that's where we would like to live, right? I think a good strategy in a workplace situation, and this is for anything that you're doing, is you should have best practices. Most of our lives, that's why Groundhog Day, that movie from the 90s, is so popular, because sometimes our days just feel the same over and over again. And there's a best practice for the way to develop habits and live in that obvious realm. But understanding how you pull yourself out of that on purpose in order to practice randomness or your ability to adapt to difference is really important. It's also, if you have checklists and habits in place, are you just cemented like cement shoes into those? Or are you always questioning and looking, is there a better way? So in a workplace, having a complex realm of problem solving where innovation and invention happens and you're bringing outside perspectives is really important. Even if your daily practices are always in best practices, you're creating like a stakeholders or task force groups to be curious about the what if. This is what like military does. This West Point has a whole department on the what if. What if we had a ground invasion from Canada? What if we had a drone invasion from North Korea? I don't know, like whatever it is, they're always asking the what if question. And then they have task force that do worst case scenarios and plan out military strategy for things that have never happened, that are at least within their imagination. Uh, and I will bring up a current event right now with the horrific situation that's happened on October 7th in Israel with Hamas coming into Israel and now the horrible things that are happening in the Gaza. I know this is a political hot topic, but I'm only just going to bring up one point that came out, that apparently Israel had military intelligence about October 7th, not the actual day, but that they had this plan of invading Israel. And it went into their military what if, and they apparently, as the news I heard it, is that they dismissed it as not plausible. But that's not really what you're supposed to do, as I think this is from World War Z. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna totally try to remember in the movie. What is it called? In World War Z by Max Brooks. He calls it the 12th man. Is it the 12th man rule? I'm actually gonna Google it to make sure I get it right. 12th man rule. Have you or maybe it's the 11th man. World War Z. The 12th man theory. Yes, it's the 12th man theory from World War Z. Okay, I was on track. So the 12th man is that you should always, if everybody on your task force agrees, if everybody in your group agrees, then you should have, or it's actually the 10th man rule, not the 12th man rule. The 10th, you should always have one person disagree and come up with a reason why. And that's just to create this idea of constantly checking and perception checking everything that's going on. So I wrote in 12th man, so that's why Google gave it to me first, but I'm looking that it's actually the 10th man rule from World War Z. I'm a big Max Brooks fan, and World War Z and Devolution are amazing books. You should read those books, or should. I recommend those books. You don't have to read them if you don't want. Okay. Thank you, Team Ross. Great questions for us today. You had another question about gender, but I didn't get written down, and now I can't remember it. And I wanted to answer your gender question. I think it was about masculine speech, and it was Andre. You had that question. It was a good question. You could have added it on here. I'm trying to see if I remember it. I can't even remember it. Sorry. I'm going to keep moving. If it comes to me, I'll stick it into one of the other teams or at the very end. Maybe I'll pause and go check, listen again and put it in. All right. Next team is the conversation captains. Hello, conversation captains. Here's your great, some of these questions. Whoa. Here we go. The first one was about dialectical tensions, that connection autonomy, which a lot of the groups brought up. I'm so glad that you picked that up. That is one, the connection autonomy dialectical tension is one of the most primary human relationship tensions. That need for independence, that need for autonomy and agency, but also our need for social acceptance. It is an integral part of our identity and social needs. So this question was about sports and being a coach for teams of young players and how do you basically, I feel like you're asking a question about young captains of a sports team or manager roles or individuals. How do you cultivate leadership where they understand that even though they have a team, they also have a team of individuals? And it's a really great question. So when you are the leader, you're in organizational leadership, right? When you are the leader of a group, in a supervisory role and you're trying to cultivate leadership in your group, we could go to David Marquette and our submarine captain. He would have I think his video, and he has a great Google talk, which is much longer than the video I posted. He would really talk about how do you cultivate leadership that values individuals. You're really asking people to see that there's the team, and you're saying, but each person is unique on that team. And sometimes you'll have a captain step up or someone in the group who really has leadership skills that they're coming in with, that it's almost like they have a natural ability, but my guess is they're coming from a familial or a background growing up that really cultivated that skill in them. Because I don't know if you've met any 2-year-olds with natural leadership abilities, but we can grow into a second nature of it. And some people really express those skills early on. Some of you have, which is why you're in this program, because you've had a lot of positive experiences that have put you in that. But not everyone gets it. Some people really fall into the fallacy the similarity fallacy, that the only way to be successful is for all of us to be the same. But you have a teacher right now who's answering your Stump the Professor question that really believes that we are only as strong as we are different. And the more different we are, the stronger we are. And that is my strong perception and standpoint on this. So one way to guide your team as a coach to understand the value of individual players is because I think it's already in the element of sports. Sports are already doing it. Just think about, okay, I'm going to talk about baseball because that's the one I know the best, but this happens in basketball and football and soccer, and all sports have it where each player is positioned differently depending on their expertise and cultivated skills. So you have a really good pitcher who is worked endlessly and has reached their 10,000 hours plus of throwing pitches, and they cultivate that high skill. And then you have someone who's a really good catcher and someone who's a good first baseman, which is a different skill set than your outfielder. And each of these skill sets, you need all of them to make a good team. If everybody had the same, was in the fallacy of similarity, and everybody had the same skill set, then you wouldn't have a team. You'd have, 12 different great pitchers. You'd have 12 pitchers and no one else on your offense or your defense, right? That would be what you don't want. So I think as the person in charge, you really just want to put a lot of emphasis on that and be a good guide for your team, remembering that their different skills is what makes them powerful. Okay, that's the best I can do for that. I have to come back to the connection autonomy. Just on a social level, like we definitely want our teams to have these kind of icebreaker or these downtime social experiences that really bond the team, not just in the workplace, but you also want to encourage team players to have separation, like to not, okay, season's over, go make friends, like go make a new friend. Do you have a study group in your class that is not have any other team members on it? Like you should be having your team cultivate friendships and connections outside of the team. And that will help create balance in their lives to have autonomy and be well-rounded. So that when they come to the team, they can then not be burned out on the personalities and nuance of the group. Just something to think about. Okay. As a professor, here we go. Here's a professor question. As a professor, you interact with a variety of ages and cultures. Do you notice a difference in how different generations handle workload stress, and which generation seems to handle it best? No, I don't see a difference in the way generations handle workloads or stress. I don't think one handles it better than the other. I think people handle stress differently. I think people have different ways that they handle being overwhelmed or workloads. To me, this is a question. The question is really about personalities, and it's about people as individuals. And that's because we have conversations about generations, especially in the workforce, because there are so many different generations in organizations, and that whether you have young people in supervisory roles and older people in subordinate roles, or the other way around, that we often use generations as a way to explain difference. But you can't just glump a whole generation together and say they are this. That's stereotyping. That's creating categories around something that is really a false category. Just like race or gender or sexual preference or ability. As soon as you draw a identity boundary around someone and then put labels on them, that is what stereotyping is. So when we deal with an individual, we want to decategorize them, meaning we want to take them out of their category and just deal with that person as an individual, completely separate. And then that person reveals who they are to you through dialogue, through conversation, through their behavior, their choices. And then we can start to see how they handle stress and whether they have trustworthiness or dynamism, or if they're competent in their skills. Those are the things we want to judge them as an individual, not by their societal labels. Okay, next question. How can organizations balance transparent communication with stakeholders? How can organizations balance transparent conversation with stakeholders? How can they protect proprietary information? So transparency does not mean revealing proprietary information. And okay, so this question, oh my God, there's so many things about this question. Transparent communication, stakeholders. So stakeholders can be anything. I mean, stakeholders, by its definition, is just someone who's invested in the process. So in this invested in that organization. The CEO is a stakeholder. Employees on all levels in that organization are stakeholders. Customers are stakeholders. Shareholders are stakeholders. Even a community, like at Western Oregon University, we could say that the small businesses that exist because of the university are stakeholders in investing in that university's success, so that a small town like Monmouth can maintain economic stability. So we would even say the business community is a stakeholder. So stakeholder, the list is so long. Stakeholders, so many things. Transparent communication is really, you're talking about taking responsibility and acknowledging process. Okay, sorry, I lost the word. Acknowledging process is the word I'll use for now. There's probably a better word. You probably thought of it in the pause. I'd love to hear what it is. But so that means that you could, let's say with shareholders, you have a CEO is going to meet and do a big presentation to the shareholders of their company or to their board of directors. And they're going to say, I'm going to be transparent because they're giving the economic investment. They're making the decisions about where the money goes in this company, and the CEO has to come with a transparent vision of where we're going. Now, if part of that is, let's say, defense contracts or an invention that they need to protect an invention from it being stolen, a stakeholder doesn't want that revealed. Good stakeholders don't need the nuance of it. They want to know about, we are handling this process. We hit this scandal and here's what we've hired some lawyers and we are working through it. And you can hear them balancing how to answer these questions whenever you hear them in interview situations of, well, I can't address this part because it's in legal proceedings, but I can tell you this, right? And that is transparency. That is, I am telling you why I can't tell you this, but I can tell you this. So let's just understand kind of the difference with it. Really, also, it depends who you're talking to. So the second half of the answer to this question is know your audience, know what they need to know, and be appropriate, be effective, and also remember to listen clearly and be clear about what is being asked by your stakeholder. Don't make assumptions, don't jump to conclusions, don't assume. Set expectations for the conversations. Know your goals and outcomes and be clear about that before diving into the information part of it. And then also, usually if you are going to be in a presentation situation where you have to talk to a board of directors or talk to customers, you usually are going to be coming back to the core values, the mission statement, there's another word for it, but the central value, I don't know if that's exactly the central value and intention or goals. You really want to have a strong foundation for when you're answering questions. So know your audience, be appropriate, effective, and know your goal. Okay. Conversation captains also had a fourth question, but I want to get to the next group because those were big questions. My voice is feeling a little raspy. Okay. The Washed Up Jocks. Hi, Washed Up Jocks. We have 3 questions here. Here's another trick. I consider these trick questions. What's the worst generation and why? Oh, I feel like you're like, can I get into the stereotypes and prejudice of the worst generation? Here's how I'm going to answer this question. Comparison and ranking are classic fallacies that I don't. That's why we are products of the generations that came before us, the inventions that came before us, the generations of my family, the ancestral divisions where people made mistakes, people were innovative and creative, but they made me who I am today. I stand on the shoulders of generations. Trying to rank that and comparing them kind of undermines, and I lose focus from the work I need to do to take care of my piece in the link of chain, so that the seventh generation can flourish. And that's really the most important thing, is not to be past focused. I'm future focused to the generation I will never meet. That's the thing that I want to focus on. Okay. This second question is hilarious. I feel like I'm taking the Stephen Colbert test right now. If animals could talk, which one would be the rudest? Well, humans, my answer for this are humans. Humans are animals. We can talk, and we can be pretty offensive and rude. We can also be incredibly compassionate, kind, and empathetic, and considerate, but we can also be rude. And also, if animals could talk, animals can talk. We just don't understand their language. But even birds, bird song, I really want to talk about this. Like bird songs, let's say if we take a bird species that you can find in different parts of the United States, if you took one from the South and tried to put it into a relationship with one from the Northwest, they even if they're the same species of bird, they may not be able to talk to each other because birds develop regional dialects and regional songs that are unique to their region. And when they get mixed up with each other, because humans love to capture and put them into cages and ship them everywhere, they actually can't talk to each other because they speak different languages. And that sounds lonely and sad, and it fills me with a lot of sadness when I think about it. We know that elephants have mama elephants have very specific sounds, talking that they do, that is very specific, that their babies understand, but if you brought another baby elephant in to live with mommy elephant, it would take a while for that baby elephant to understand that mom. It's like speaking 2 different languages. Same with whales. And almost all species have types of ways that they're communicating. So, as far as I'm concerned, animals can talk. We just don't understand what they're saying. And humans are very egocentric in the way that we think that our way of communicating is the only way. Okay, that's my answer for that. I get very protective of animals. I'm not gonna lie. How do you measure happiness and how do you find it? Okay, this is our last question. How do you measure happiness and how did you find it? Oh, I am in the search. I am in the pursuit of happiness. And my first response to this question is this idea of the pursuit of happiness, which I am very aware that happiness is about motion. It's about, it's not, there's not an end and I'm happy. That's another fallacy, is that when we're in the mindset, if I get X, that will equal happiness. If I buy this, if I get my diploma, if I travel, and then check the box, then I will be happy. And that's not really how I define happiness. I think of it as flow. So I think of happiness as the experience of flow. And it is a mind that has focus is a mind that is happy. A mind that has focus is a mind that is happy. That is a happy mind. um, and so there's quite a few athletes in this class. And you don't have to be an athlete to have experienced flow, but you definitely know the experience of being in the zone of the game or of the practice of that activity that pulls you into a place of flow. And that is a focused mind. And that's what I mean by a happy mind, is a mind of flow. Now, how do we find it, or how do I try to go about find it? I think one way to think about it is to think about distractions. So distractions take us out of flow. Anyone have any distractions around? Distraction. There is just a field of distractions that can be happening around you. And every time you get a distraction, or every time you're asking your mind to multitask, you are moving out of flow and you're moving away from a happy mind. So when I think about moving into happiness, whether I have to write a paper that I don't really want to write, or if I have whatever activity, or if I'm in the garden and I lose track of time gardening, that happens because I'm in a place of focus. So one thing on the metaphor, my mom and I talk about this sometimes, that electricity, to use a physics example, electricity is a flow, right? It flows through from a source, the current flows, and then it is used. You turn on your light switch and poof, right? You have the happy mind, it's being used. But there's this thing called a resistor that controls that flow so you don't blow up. You don't blow out the light switch, or you end up, if it's or you end up in a brownout or a burnout of that circuit. Same thing with your mind. Like, what are the things that you do to create an element of resistance, which is basically like a constraint, so that your mind can move into focus. So like if I have to write a paper that I don't want to write, because I really have a hard time writing, I will often do that Pomodoro timer, the tomato timer. You can just Google that, and they have all different like things about that, or look it up on YouTube, or maybe you've heard of the tomato timer. And that is a way to create a constraint. So I will set the timer for 30 minutes, and then decide what I'm going to do and do it. And then I take a break, a short break. Set the timer again, take a short break, set the timer a third time. And each time is a little bit like 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And then I take a long break, like 15 minutes. And then I come back and start again. And that way, my mind, that's the way that I create the electricity flow of my mind to stay in a focused place. Yet I'm not getting burned out and I'm not blowing up my mind circuit and being overwhelmed by the experience. And of course, eliminating as many distractions as I can so that I can, whatever, and some people find that in a communal space like a study space like a library or a coffee shop, or some people find it just really secluded and more isolated. So this is very individual where you find and how you find flow. But my guess is whether it was art or in an exercise or sporting event, all of you have experienced flow of some type. And the question is, what were the elements that made that happen? And how can you recreate it when you have to do activities that you don't always have to do to maintain a place of happiness or the pursuit of happiness? All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm looking forward to hearing your responses to this response to your response. I'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.